Hello and happy Halloween. Welcome to Fowl Plays, where we look at tales of tabletop tragedy that are sure to ruffle some feathers. I'm your host, BossGoose, and as a holiday treat, we have two stories for you today. Our first story takes place at a table for beginners that is joined by a pair of edgy older players who, after agreeing to the DM's rules for the session, attempt to argue and subvert them almost immediately, leading to quick and decisive action. And our second story brings us back to our old friend Loverboy, as a player wanting to join his game completely ignores the campaign requirements and submits his own better ideas for the setting with his overpowered Edgelord Master of Darkness PC. Before we get started with that though, I'm expecting a few trick-or-treaters, so it's time for us to play a quick game of Ed, Edge, and Edgy. Here's how to play. We have 3 doors here that are all being knocked on, and one of them is our trick-or-treater, Ed. The other 2 are Edgelords who want to tell us all about their epically tragic backstories for their OCs. I'm going to leave it up to you to determine which of these 3 doors we should answer, A, B, or C, while I go get the candy. So you go ahead and make your choice and we'll see who's behind it in 3, 2, 1. And if you chose door C, then great job. Candy has been delivered, and since he's actually the only kid in the area, we can dig into the rest of these goodies ourselves while you enjoy the story. Unfortunately, however, if you chose A or B, then prepare for a long night as we sit through monologue after monologue of cliché tragedy and power fantasies. On the bright side, you can tune this out simply by hitting that subscribe button, which will give you updates on whenever new content is available on my channel, and easy access to dozens of existing stories that'll keep you entertained while our edgy guest drones on. Now, without any further delays, it's time to take your seats and wet your beaks as we dive on into today's tale. Our first story is titled, Some People in This Hobby Are Straight Up Psychos. TLDR, Edgelord of the Week tried to satisfy his needs in a tutorial game for newbies. Occasionally, I'm running a Monster of the Week style beginner's game. Just some basic adventures with whoever shows up. These games are aimed at newbies to show them the ropes and, of course, recruit some of them into other games. Since there's a lot of younger players, I keep things PG-13. I don't mind the occasional veteran player joining as well, as long as they're fine with sitting back while I tend to the younglings, or helping out yourself. Now get a hold of these 2 guys, and how I kicked them out. The cast. Me, the GM. Edgelord. Older newbie player. I suspect he wasn't new, just got kicked out too often. Elitist. Veteran player and RP elitist. Absolutely full of himself. Some newbies that didn't say much, you'll understand why. My other table rules for these games are simple. No evil characters, only PG-13, and cooperate. Edgelord was immediately confused by my no evil PC rule. For a newbie, he had suspiciously familiar arguments against it. Evil characters can be a great storytelling device and stuff like this. That's too complicated in a casual group with newbies. This game is meant to be as simple as possible. I told him so and disallowed it. The elitist immediately jumped on that discussion with further arguments how I as a GM can't interfere with player agency. Blah blah blah. I shut that down too. This is a tutorial group for newbies, for crying out loud. Want to play a storytelling epic about your edgy character? Find a different table then. These guys sulked, but I was pretty clear I wasn't budging, so they agreed to leave it. Quest of the day was a bandit camp that got too dangerous to be handled for the town's guard because someone with magic seemed to be helping the bandits. The group moved out, dealt with some crazy druid, and arrested the rest of the bandits. All nice clean PG-13 action. Edgelord wasn't having it though. Before the guardsmen arrived to lock away the bandits, he took a female bandit aside for questioning. But instead of asking a question, something like this came out. Edgelord. I want to cut all the tendons in her limbs and make her crawl and squirm on the floor with her useless limbs. The table was shocked. Emergency banhammer was ready. I argued that it's pretty high on the scale of sadism, especially for this game, so I'm taking the character over as evil NPC, following the rule that evil characters are not allowed. Elitist immediately jumped to defend his buddy. At first, they tried to make a case how the bandit's life is inconsequential and it shouldn't matter in any way what happens to them. I think that says a lot about their mindset if that's what you go for to defend your deeds. Their second point was that the bandits were to be executed anyway. Yeah, this isn't getting better. The sad thing is, they seem to believe this an overall acceptable mindset IRL. I wasn't going to listen any further to their BS, and I'm not entertaining anyone's murder boner. Banhammer was deployed for both. So I have to say what really ticks me off about this story is that this was a game geared towards helping people getting started in D&D. And these two clowns decided to showcase some of the worst aspects a player can have during it. It seems unlikely that Edgelord was actually a new player. His arguments for wanting so badly to make an evil character sound like a dance he did often. It's possible that he's new to the system D&D, but experienced with other TTRPGs. He probably thought he was really clever too, agreeing with the DM's terms and then turning around and trying to torture the bandit as if it wasn't an evil action because there was an N in his alignment. And of course his friend Elitist was totally enabling this behavior as well, and the tired arguments of how the DM wasn't allowed to interfere with player agency and the bandit's life didn't matter adds to the suspicion that these two have been through many tables where they pulled this kind of stuff. Based on the way he behaved, if I had to take a guess, I would say Elitist probably runs his own games and is used to having control and was trying to undermine the DM in this one. But the reason it ticks me off is because I wouldn't be surprised if these two ended up scaring some of those newbies away from the hobby. So I'm glad that DM was quick and decisive with removing the problems before they got worse like so many other stories do. But now let's go ahead and lighten the mood a little with our second story, titled Player Wants to Play as the Literal Spawn of Satan and is Surprised When Rejected. Okay, I'll try to keep this shorter than usual. So, my friends DMing a custom setting that we designed together. You can read my previous story for a more detailed description if interested, but I will quickly summarize the relevant parts here. Basically, it's a dark fantasy world where the players control a squad of artificially created half-monster hybrids, specifically designed by humans for combating other monsters. So, for example, the most commonly utilized hybrid are creatures known as defanged, which are essentially artificially created vampires that exclusively crave the blood of other vampiric entities. Once, if ever, their purpose is fulfilled, they will wither away and die out as well. Pretty much every hybrid has some sort of failsafe in their design that ensures their compliance. Think DC's Suicide Squad and add a grimdark aesthetic to it. My friend is still going to be referred to by his full former WoW username, Loverboyxxx, which I refuse to abbreviate because forcing people to read the whole thing out is hilarious to me. I'm a fully functioning adult, I swear. Recently, Loverboy wanted to expand and diversify his player roster, since most of his current players, with the exception of one, are playing defanged characters. That's not necessarily a bad thing since they all play them well, but it's a shame considering the amount of effort put into the world. Personally, I think he's just feeling guilty that he made me come up with all these races and factions that nobody ended up playing. But, you know, that's just a hunch. So, he decided to put up an ad on Discord stating what he was looking for. For context, it is a large server that hosts a variety of TTRPG games with their own dedicated channels. His only requirements were for any potential player to familiarize themselves with the basics of the lore and to choose a species that isn't a defanged. Straightforward enough, right? At least most of the other candidates thought so. That is, with the exception of one, who we will call Succula. Succula was one of the last people to respond to the ad, by which point Loverboy had already filled the desired slot in his party. However, Succula was particularly enthusiastic, emphasizing that they were a big fan of classic horror and they had been looking for a setting like this one for a while. Being the stern and yet merciful god that he is, Loverboy let them know that he could free up an extra slot and asked them to submit their character's backstory for review so he could figure out how to integrate them in the current plot. Also, yes, he once again made it abundantly clear that he was no longer accepting vampire characters. Other than that, all other playable, emphasis on playable, species and classes were fine. 2 days go by since their last interaction and no word from Succula. Loverboy figured that they were either busy or really committed to writing out a detailed backstory. The group were taking a break that weekend, so he had no reason to rush them. On the following Monday, just before heading to bed, he was messaged by Succula, who provided a Google Docs link for their newly created character. Upon opening said link, our unfortunate protagonist was greeted by walls upon walls of solid text. The glow of the screen illuminated his weary and unreasonably handsome face. His eyes stung from the bright red letters inscribed upon a black background using a suitably edgy font. Every fiber of his being was telling him to stop, to look away before it's too late, and yet his morbid curiosity got the better of him, and so, against his better judgment, he read on. Now, I don't think that it would be right for me to copy-paste the entirety of this person's sheet, so I will just recount what I think are the most noteworthy parts. For one, I'm not sure whether they even read any of the lore. We have a basic list of bullet points that is only about 1,000 characters long. That's only half of Discord's character limit per post. Succula outright stated that they were a fully fledged vampire, not even the world's version of it. Just a classical, sleeps in a coffin and hangs from the rafters kind of vampire. Red eyes and long cape included. I'm not throwing shade at the stereotypical archetype, just not what we were going for. Second, instead of choosing a class, they went ahead and made up their own. Well, okay, they technically chose a rogue as their profession, but they also added that they were capable of enhancing their attacks with vampiric magic. To answer your question, no, we didn't have anything called vampiric magic in our setting. Hell, even the quintessential D&D style blood magic wasn't fully introduced yet. They were able to turn into a bat and a wolf at will, because of course they were. And my personal favorite, they were able to make other characters into their personal thralls. Overpowered? Unreasonable? Yes, but not entirely unsalvageable so far. Loverboy usually tweaks his class system a bit to accommodate players, and, while the fact that this person clearly hadn't bothered to read any of the rules was annoying, perhaps a compromise could yet be reached. Perhaps Succula could have played some sort of deluded, theatrical antagonist, thinking himself an incarnation of Dracula himself, the legend of whom does canonically exist in the world. Well, all such inclinations were dashed as soon as Loverboy got to the backstory. See, Succula's character wasn't born, conventionally speaking. Oh no, that would be too predictable, too tame. Instead, they were actually among the first vampires to ever exist. Formed from the sizzling blood pools of hell itself. You can probably already guess who their father is proposed to be. You've read the title. When Loverboy told me about this, my first thought was that this person had to be taking the piss. But then I read it, and, well, while I can't be 100% certain they weren't just trolling, it was written in such a genuine way that I can't help but think that they were being for real. They even disputed their decline, saying that it made sense for a character like theirs to exist. Gotta love it when people lecture you and try to educate you on your own setting. But of course, Loverboy was the one who was unreasonable for not letting them play their bootleg Castlevania reject. Besides, they were actually doing us a favor by contributing to the established and, in their opinion, mundane lore. Internal logic be damned, it's all about that power fantasy, baby. Needless to say, they left soon after throwing their little tantrum. It's not really a horror experience as much as I just found it ridiculous and wanted to share it. Sure, Succula was sort of being an ass at the end, and their entitlement and expectations were less than reasonable, but they weren't some comically awful cartoon villain either. TLDR, player submits an edgy Mary Sue character for approval and is surprised when it gets rejected. Doesn't even get to session 0. Poor Loverboy. This world sounds so interesting, yet it's exactly the kind of setting that seems to attract this kind of player. I think Succula may be in a league of his own when it comes to ridiculous character concepts. It takes a special kind of person to just completely ignore the provided game materials and the basic requirements to join said game in the first place, just making up whatever he felt like and submitting that. That alone kind of gives you a good idea of what kind of guy he was, but then you have the character write-up itself. From the edgy red text on the black background to being the literal spawn of Satan himself was the stuff of cringy legend, my friends. And of course, what edgy character wouldn't be complete without overpowered, completely random abilities? The ability to shapeshift at will, vague vampiric magic, and the ability to enslave other players and NPCs? It's like he basically took Strahd's stat block, added some Alucard abilities from Castlevania, and figured no one would notice if he pasted his character's name on it. Thing is, it does sound like Loverboy may have been willing to work with Succula on making a viable character out of this mess, but of course, any watering down of his power fantasy was unacceptable, and for someone who likely didn't even read the lore of the setting, he had some strong opinions about how his Dark Lord spawn of Satan was not only perfect for the setting, but improved it. I shudder to think what would have happened if he had actually made it through and into the game, but luckily it never got to that point as he was shown the door immediately. I know this is more of an almost horror story, but it was entertaining to read such an outrageous concept nonetheless. Let's hope Loverboy has smooth sailing going forward in his campaign setting with no more cat girls, pectoral passions, or satanic sons to deal with. But anyways, thanks for checking out my video and sticking around till the end, everyone. I hope you all found it entertaining. I upload new content every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, so make sure you check out my channel for more D&D stories. And if you like this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave me a goosebump in the comments below. Your feedback and support is greatly appreciated. But until next time, be good players.